My flight into Reno had landed just after noon, the kind of soft winter light that made the lake look like brushed metal. I drove the rental car up toward Lake Tahoe with that stubborn hope I had dragged around for most of my life, the hope that maybe this time my sister would want me there. By the time I pulled into the resort parking lot, the cold had settled through my coat and into my ribs, but I kept telling myself it was nerves and not the same old ache. Inside the lobby, everything looked warm and expensive. Polished floors, tall windows, people laughing quietly as they checked in for the wedding weekend. I hesitated near the fireplace before walking to the front desk. A young employee greeted me with the polite smile that comes from training, not interest. I gave him my name, Evelyn Carter, expecting the usual pause as he scrolled through the list. He typed for a bit, then frowned, then typed again. His fingers stopped. He glanced at me, then at the tablet, then back at me with an expression I recognized far too well. I could almost feel the exact second his voice softened the way people soften their tone when they think the news will sting. "I am sorry, your name is not here?" He said it gently, but the words landed like a physical thing inside my chest. I asked him to try again. He did. Same result. I swallowed, nodded as if this was some minor clerical mistake, then stepped aside so the next couple could check in. My hands were shaking by the time I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Melissa's number and pressed call. The phone rang twice before she answered. I could hear music behind her, laughter, someone calling her name. She sounded busy, but not the kind of busy that made room for me. I told her I was at the resort, and the front desk could not find my name. There was a short silence. Not surprise, not confusion, a kind of silence that carried irritation. Like I had put myself where she never intended me to stand. "Why would you think you were invited, Evelyn?" She sounded tired of me, as if this conversation had played out in her head long before I called. For a second I waited for her to laugh, to say she was joking, that the coordinator probably made a mistake. There was no laugh, just a breath and then the sound of her turning away from the phone to speak to someone else. The call ended without a goodbye. I stood near the wide stone column in the lobby, listening to the low hum of people moving around me, the wedding guests, the staff, the clatter of luggage wheels on the tile. It all blurred into something distant. The truth hit harder than I expected. Not a mix-up, not an oversight, a deliberate removal. For a few moments I could not move. My legs felt anchored by something that had nothing to do with the floor beneath me. I kept replaying her voice in my head. "Why would you think you were invited?" It was cruel. But more than that, it was familiar in a way that made me feel 16 again. Standing in our kitchen while my mother told me Melissa had been chosen for something I was never even considered for, I forced myself to walk toward a quiet corner of the lobby. My breath kept catching in my throat. I had come here telling myself I would do this right. Show up quietly, sit in the back, give the gift I had chosen with so much care, and maybe rebuild a tiny bridge that had been broken for years. And now I was standing in a place where people celebrated love and belonging while I was reminded that I did not belong in my own family. I opened my purse and touched the cream envelope tucked inside. It had traveled with me for weeks, from Boulder to meetings, site visits, late nights at my office, all because I knew I needed to give it to her in person. Inside was the completed transfer document for the Zephyr Cove house, the house I had spent 2 years restoring, the house worth $3.1 million. The house I had once imagined giving her as a peace offering, a beginning instead of an ending. My fingers trembled as I held the envelope. I thought about the hours restoring that home, the decisions, the structure, the long nights reviewing materials with Daniel. That house meant something to me. It represented a kind of strength I built for myself, the kind no one in my family ever believed I had. And I had intended to give it to her, because no matter how many years passed, I had kept a part of myself that believed love required giving even when you had received nothing. But standing there in that lobby, rejected without ceremony, something shifted in me. It was not anger. Anger I was familiar with. This was different. It was recognition, a steady, cold clarity. Melissa had not left me off the list by accident. She had done it because in her world, I had never been meant to stand beside her. And in my world, I kept leaving a door open she had no intention of ever walking through. I closed the envelope and walked back to the front desk. The young employee noticed me and straightened as if preparing for another uncomfortable exchange. I placed the envelope gently on the counter. I asked him to have it delivered to the bride after the ceremony. His expression shifted from confusion to sympathy, and I appreciated that he did not ask questions. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady in a way my chest was not. I stepped back into the cold outside, the kind of cold that filled your lungs and forced you to feel every breath. The lights strung across the entrance flickered in the late afternoon wind. I walked past the valet, past the groups laughing and greeting each other, past the warmth of the lobby that had made me feel smaller than I had in years. At my car, I sat for a long moment before turning the key. I watched my reflection in the rearview mirror, the faint tremble in my jaw, the tightness around my eyes. I had expected pain today. I had not expected clarity. Leaving that resort did not feel like retreat. It felt like choosing myself for the first time, not because I wanted to punish Melissa, but because being in that lobby made something finally settle inside me. I could not keep asking to be part of a family that kept telling me no. I backed out of the parking lot and started down the winding mountain road. The sky was fading into a pale gold, the lake stretching below like a sheet of glass. I told myself I would deal with the fallout later, the calls, the questions, whatever storm would come once Melissa opened the envelope. But not now, not today. The road curved along the ridge, quiet except for the sound of tires on cold pavement. I drove without music, letting the silence wrap around me. Somewhere behind me, a celebration was unfolding without me, the kind of event where families gathered and toasted futures together. And somewhere in a few hours, someone would hand my sister an envelope she never expected from a sister she never saw. The sun slipped behind the mountains, and the light thinned. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, aware that for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was driving toward something or away from something. I was simply moving, and maybe that was enough for now. The mountains faded behind me as I drove, but the quiet in the car pulled me backward instead of forward, back into rooms I used to stand in, back into moments that shaped the way I had learned to shrink myself. It always surprised me how memory could reach across decades with the same sharpness as the day it happened. Sometimes I wished it would blur with time, turn softer around the edges, but mine never did, especially the ones that involved my family. I could see our old house in Colorado as if I had stepped right through its front door again. The living room with its faded green carpet, the wooden bookshelf my father built when Melissa and I were still little, the smell of pot roast that always meant my mother had someone to impress that evening. I used to walk through those rooms feeling like I was stepping around someone else's life. Melissa fit right into it. She glowed in every space, always saying the right thing, always impressing the adults with how poised and polite she was. I never had that skill. My mother said I lacked smooth edges. She liked children who stayed inside the lines, not the ones who asked why the lines were there in the first place. There was one afternoon that crept back into my mind with the kind of clarity that made my stomach tighten. I must have been 10 or 11. Melissa had just won a regional spelling bee, and the whole family gathered in the living room to celebrate. My grandparents had brought a cake. My dad kept telling anyone who would listen how proud he was, and my mother floated through the room as if she had personally produced Melissa's victory through sheer discipline. I had brought home a science project that same day, a model of a small hydroelectric dam I built from cardboard and recycled pieces I found in the garage. I had worked on it every day after school for a week. Melissa barely glanced at it. My mother smiled at it politely, the kind of smile people give when they want to acknowledge something without encouraging it. She patted my shoulder and said it was interesting. Then she lifted Melissa's trophy and placed it in the center of the mantel like a crown. My father ruffled my hair in the half-distracted way he sometimes did, but his eyes kept drifting back to my sister, who was surrounded by relatives telling her she was destined for great things. I stood there holding my science project, hearing praise swirl around Melissa, and I felt small in a way I did not yet have the words for. I knew even at that age that Melissa filled the space in that house exactly the way my mother wanted, and I was the child who took up the extra corners. Later that night, Melissa walked into our shared room, the new trophy still in her hands. She set it on her nightstand like it had always belonged there. I remember sitting on my bed, arranging the pieces of my hydroelectric model back into the shoebox I had brought it home in. She watched me for a moment, then said, "You should not take it so seriously. Some of us are just better at these things." She did not mean it cruelly. Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she was explaining gravity. In its own way, that made it worse. But the moment that stayed with me came years later. When I was 17 and applying to colleges, I had worked hard for my grades and dreamed of studying civil engineering. No one in my family thought that made sense. My mother wanted me to go to the community college nearby. She said it would be safer. She said she did not see me living far from home because I needed structure. Structure was her word for control. Melissa had already been accepted into the University of Denver, with scholarships and letters of recommendation from every adult who had ever seen her shine. The contrast was sharp enough to slice through me. One night she found me in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with my acceptance letter from Colorado State University. I had been staring at it for over an hour, afraid to show it to my parents. Melissa leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. She told me I was brave to try something so big, but the way she said it made brave feel like a synonym for unrealistic. Then she added something else. Mom says you always want things that do not fit you. She said you should pick something stable. She paused. Maybe families are not your thing. Ev, you do not seem to fit with us the way I do. It was the first time she had said it so plainly. I remember looking up and seeing no malice in her face. Just the calm certainty of someone repeating a truth she believed. It pierced deeper because of that. Families are not your thing. I did not argue. I did not trust my voice. I folded the acceptance letter and slipped it back into its envelope, knowing I would take it with me the day I finally left. That moment followed me all the way to 18. When my mother confronted me during a family dinner, she told me I was careless. She told me I did not think about the people who loved me. She said I needed guidance, structure, direction, and that going away to college would only exaggerate my flaws. She said I should stop pretending I was ready for a life I could not handle. I excused myself from the table before the tears came. I grabbed the small duffel bag I had packed weeks earlier for this very possibility and walked out without saying goodbye. I heard the front door open behind me. My father's voice floated out calling my name, but he did not follow. The porch light stayed on as I walked down the driveway, then faded behind me like the end of a scene in a play. Driving now along the mountain road, I felt that same sensation in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something close to release. The patterns in my family had always been carved deep. Melissa fit? I did not. My mother adored the daughter who reflected well on her. She tolerated the one who asked too many questions. Even when I built a life of my own in Boulder, even when I found joy in work they did not understand, that old dynamic stuck to me like a shadow. The twist was that I had believed for too long that the shadow was my fault. The road straightened as I reached the lower valley, and I cracked the window to let in the cold air. It was grounding in a way my memories were not. I thought about how many times I had tried to show up for Melissa, how many holidays I returned home only to feel like an afterthought. Every year the conversation seemed scripted. Melissa performed her successes. My mother clapped on cue, my father smiled kindly in the background, and I faded out at the edges. Maybe I had come to Tahoe for one last attempt at changing the script. Maybe part of me had hoped Melissa would look at me and see a sister instead of a flaw in her narrative. Maybe I wanted to be wrong about everything I had always believed. But the lobby at that resort had made the truth undeniable. Melissa saw me exactly the way she always had. The difference was that I finally saw it too. When I reached the turnoff toward the highway, I slowed the car and took one last look at the mountains behind me. They stood tall and unbending, not asking to be understood, simply existing without apology. I envied that steadiness. I told myself that if I kept driving, maybe I could learn a little of it for myself. The road stretched open ahead of me, darker now, but somehow clearer than it had been in years. I pressed the gas and let the car carry me forward, leaving the memories behind, just long enough to breathe. I kept driving until the valley opened wide and the air thinned enough to make my chest feel lighter. That stretch of road always had a way of clearing out the noise in my head, but on that night, the silence only pulled me deeper into memories I thought I had already made peace with. Leaving home at 18 had felt like the only choice I had left, yet the weight of it stayed with me long after the door closed behind me. I arrived in Fort Collins just before dusk on the day I left. The sky was streaked with pink, and the air smelled like spring rain. And I remember thinking it was the first time the world felt bigger than the house I had grown up in. I moved into a small basement room that a retired teacher rented to college students. It had low ceilings and a single window looking out at ground level. I could hear footsteps above me and the hum of the washing machine through the thin walls. It was cramped and dark, but it was mine, my own life, beginning in a space no one else could shrink me in. At Colorado State University, I kept to myself. I went to classes early, sat in the back, and worked shifts wherever I could find them. Dishwashing, docking shelves at a hardware store, scraping old paint from apartment hallways, anything that paid enough to cover textbooks and groceries. My classmates had parents who visited on weekends and sent care packages. I had a phone that stayed silent unless Melissa needed something or my mother wanted to remind me that being away did not mean I had grown up. There was one call during my freshman year that I still remember almost word for word. My mother told me Melissa had been offered an internship with a marketing firm in Denver. She said it as though she was announcing that Melissa had been selected for a national award. Then she asked me if I was still working that job at the hardware store. Her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. She ended the call by saying she hoped I would figure out what I wanted for my life before it was too late. Too late for what? I had wondered. Too late to be useful to them, or too late to disappoint them in new ways. My father called me once that year on my birthday. He asked if I was staying warm and whether my classes were going well. Then he said he was proud of me. He said it quietly, like he was afraid someone in the house might hear. I held that sentence close for a long time, even though it came wrapped in the same silence that had always followed me around. By the time I reached my junior year, I had learned how to make peace with being invisible to my own family. I built a small life for myself, friends from class, long study nights at the library, weekend shifts that left my hands raw and paint-stained. I felt tired most days, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from knowing the thing you are building is yours alone. I still visited home on holidays, though I never stayed long. My mother would ask Melissa a list of questions about school, work, her new boyfriend, her internships. Then she would turn to me with a soft smile that never reached her eyes and ask if I had considered switching majors to something more practical. My father would refill the drinks on the table and try to keep the peace. Melissa would talk about her plans as if mine did not exist, and I would sit there, trying to fold myself into a smaller shape so I would take up less space. Things reached a breaking point during Thanksgiving of my junior year. We were sitting around the dining table, and the air was warm from the oven and the clatter of dishes. My mother started talking about how Melissa was on track for a job offer, even before she graduated. She said Melissa had always had the qualities of someone who could build a strong family someday. Then she looked at me and asked if I had finally settled down enough to think about my future. Before I could answer, she added that some people simply did better with guidance and staying close to home. I remember the way the fork felt in my hand, too heavy for something so small. I remember Melissa glancing at me, waiting for me to agree that I needed to be guided. I remember my father's eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Without thinking, I set the fork down, stood, and excused myself. I walked down the hallway to the small guest room where I had put my things. I packed my bag with hands that shook and could hear my mother calling after me, asking where I thought I was going. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me in the face, and the porch light flickered behind me. My father opened the door and called my name once. Then he closed it. It did not slam. It just clicked shut in the quiet way of things ending. I drove back to Fort Collins that night, the roads empty and wide. When I reached my basement room, I sat on the bed with my coat still on. I think I cried for the first time in years, not because of the words they said, but because of the ones they never bothered to say. No one asked me to stay. No one asked me why I left. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. For a long time after that, holidays stopped having meaning. I worked extra shifts, stayed on campus during breaks, and leaned into the independence I had carved out. I learned how to be my own company and how to set my own expectations. It was not loneliness exactly. It was a life without noise. Melissa called occasionally during those years, mostly when she wanted advice about something trivial, pretending we were closer than we were. Sometimes she sent photos of family gatherings I was not invited to. Sometimes she apologized for being busy and missing my call, even though I had not called her at all. Her version of sisterhood had always been selective and convenient. The truth was simple and heavy. My family had decided a long time ago what my role was, and the only way to survive was to step out of the part they wrote for me. By the time I finished college and took my first job with a small renovation crew in Boulder, I felt something inside me shift. I loved the work in a way that startled me. The sound of old tile breaking free, the smell of fresh lumber, the satisfaction of discovering what a home used to be before someone gave up on it. I liked turning something worn and forgotten into something useful again. I liked how straightforward it felt. Houses did not expect you to be someone else. They only asked you to show up and do the work. Those early years shaped everything that came after. The long hours, the heavy lifting, the way my muscles ached at night. I was learning a language my family never understood. A language of rebuilding instead of proving. The road ahead of me now stretched into a darker sky as the last hints of sunlight faded. My windshield reflected the faint lights of passing cars. I thought of how far I had come from that girl who left her home with a duffel bag and nowhere to land. I had spent so many years believing I had to earn a place in my family. Sitting behind the steering wheel, feeling the quiet settle into my bones, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by trying to belong somewhere I never truly fit. Acceptance is a strange thing. Sometimes you spend decades reaching for it, and other times it arrives in a single moment, like a door closing gently in a hallway you no longer need to walk down. The highway signs blurred past, and I let the miles between me and that resort carry the memories with them. I did not know what waited ahead, but for the first time, I was not afraid of the space opening in front of me. That space felt like something I had never been offered before. It felt like possibility. Possibility was something I had chased for so long that I almost did not recognize it when it finally appeared. It settled into the quiet of the car like a presence, steady and patient, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. By the time I reached the outskirts of Boulder, the sky had turned dark and wide and full of stars that seemed sharper than usual. Maybe it was only that my mind was clearer now than it had been in years. Back then, when I was 22 and still learning how to build a life from the ground up, possibility arrived in the form of a man named Daniel Reed. I remember the day perfectly because it was the first time someone looked at me and saw potential instead of a problem that needed fixing. I had taken a job with a small renovation crew that specialized in flipping neglected rental homes. My tasks were simple but exhausting: stripping damaged drywall, hauling debris to dumpsters, washing paint rollers, whatever no one else wanted to do. The pay was barely enough, but I loved the rhythm of the work. There was something honest in the way an old wall revealed its history once you opened it. One afternoon, the crew was working on a property in North Boulder, a small 2-bedroom house that leaned so far to one side that I wondered if a strong wind could knock it into the neighbor's yard. My boss had assigned me to remove the rotted baseboards. I was crouched on the floor with a pry bar when I heard someone new greeting the crew. His voice was calm and confident, like a person who knew how to fix things without making a show of it. When he stepped into the living room, he watched me work for a moment. He did not interrupt. He just observed the angle of the pry bar, the pressure I used, the way I paused to check the grain before pulling the next piece free. Then he nodded as if confirming something to himself. "You take your time," he said. "Most people rush this part and end up damaging the wall behind it." I looked up, surprised that anyone noticed. He introduced himself as Daniel. He was a general contractor in his early 40s with sun-worn skin and a thoughtful way of speaking. He had been hired to evaluate whether the house was worth investing in. The rest of the crew treated him with the kind of respect that came from years of seeing him turn half-ruined properties into beautiful homes. I felt a little self-conscious, but he seemed more interested in how I approached the work than in the fact that I was the youngest and least experienced on site. Later that afternoon, he asked if I wanted to help him inspect the framing behind a damaged wall. I followed him, holding a work light while he explained what we were looking for. He talked about load-bearing beams, moisture patterns, the way a house communicates its condition if you learn to listen to it. I absorbed every word. When we finished, he wiped dust from his hands and said, "You have a good eye for this." I did not know people said things like that in real life. I had spent so much time around voices that highlighted flaws that hearing something positive felt almost foreign. "Work with me again," he said as he packed up his tools. I could use someone who notices details. That was how it started, simple as that. He invited me to help on a weekend renovation he was managing on the south side of town. I agreed without hesitation. The job was harder than anything I had done before. Reframing a sagging wall, repairing subflooring, rebuilding a porch that had rotted through. Daniel pushed me, but he also trusted me. which was something I had never experienced from anyone outside of school. Over the next 2 years, he taught me everything he knew: how to evaluate a property in 15 minutes, how to predict structural problems just by walking the perimeter, how to negotiate with sellers who were desperate but still proud, how to calculate the cost of materials in my head before pulling out a spreadsheet. He nudged me to take night classes in project management and real estate finance. I worked during the day, studied at night, and found myself changing in ways my family never imagined possible. During this period, my contact with my parents and Melissa grew thinner, stretched so tightly that it felt like it could break if either of us pulled too hard. Melissa called sometimes to talk about her successes. She talked about promotions, new connections, social events, as if updating an audience at a small conference. She rarely asked about my work, if she did. Her tone always suggested she was humoring me. My mother called occasionally, usually to remind me that Boulder was not a permanent solution. She asked if I planned to come back home when I finally got tired of manual labor. I did not bother correcting her. Explaining my passion for renovation work to someone who believed worth was measured by titles would have been like explaining music to someone who could not hear. In 2015, Daniel approached me with an idea that made my heart race. He wanted to start a small firm of his own, specializing in restoring older homes with good bones. He wanted me to be his partner. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. Me, a partner. The girl who left home with a duffel bag and carried every part-time job like a badge of survival. But he meant it. He told me I had an instinct that could not be taught, and the dedication to back it up. He said he had seen plenty of people with talent, but very few willing to do the slow work that transformation required. I felt something warm and unfamiliar rise in my chest when he said that. Pride, maybe, or simply the belief that someone finally saw me without the filter of my family's disappointment. We formed Carter and Reed Restorations later that summer. It was small at first, just the two of us and a handful of subcontractors. We took on projects no one else wanted because they were too risky or too labor-intensive. Broken windows, collapsed porches, pest damage, faulty wiring, everything that made a property undesirable. I loved every minute of it. One of our earliest jobs was an abandoned craftsman home in Lyon. The roof leaked, the foundation had shifted, and the interior smelled like mildew and regret. But I walked through the rooms and felt possibility humming beneath the ruin. Daniel noticed the way my eyes traced the lines of the structure, and he smiled like he had been waiting for me to see what he saw. We worked on that house for almost 6 months. I learned how to replace joists, how to select materials that preserved character without sacrificing modern safety, how to navigate building codes that seemed written to test patience. At the end of the project, we sold it to a young couple who cried when they saw the finished living room. Watching them step into a home that had once been forgotten felt like watching a life restored as much as a building. Mom and Dad never asked about the house. Melissa never asked either. They thought I spent my days with a hammer in my hand because I did not know how to do anything else. They never imagined that the work I did required intelligence, judgment, vision. They never imagined that I was building something lasting, something that would one day stand taller than the limitations they placed on me. Thinking about all this while driving home from Tahoe, I felt a familiar ache but also something steadier. Those early years were not only about survival, they were about becoming someone I actually liked being. A person who discovered her strength without needing permission. A person who learned to create value from the forgotten pieces of the world. The road narrowed as I approached the outskirts of Boulder. Streetlights flickered on one by one, stretching ahead like a quiet path. I rolled down the window and breathed in the night air. Everything I had built was waiting for me. My projects, my office, the life my family never understood. And somewhere inside all of it was the reason I had once believed Melissa and I could repair what had been broken. That belief seemed naive now, but the part of me that carried it was still there, trembling quietly, trying to make sense of what the day had become. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. The house was dark except for the small lamp in the living room window that I always left on. I sat there for a long moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the silence settle. This life had taken years to build, and it was mine. Yet even now, old memories reached for me, trying to remind me of where I started, of the family who shaped me even as they pushed me away. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, thinking of all the moments that had led me to this one. The girl who left home at 18. The young woman who learned to rebuild walls and rooms. The version of me who still believed in reconciliation. Inside the house, the air felt still and warm, but the weight of the day followed me in. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, listening to the quiet. For the first time since leaving the resort, I let myself exhale fully. Possibility was still there, steady and patient. And somewhere underneath it, the unfinished story between me and Melissa waited for whatever would come next. I walked deeper into the house, turning on the lamp by the couch, letting its soft glow spill across the living room. The quiet felt heavier tonight, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that reminded me how much space I had built for myself. Space that used to scare me, space that now felt earned. I hung up my coat, slipped off my shoes, and let myself sink onto the couch. My body felt tired, but my mind moved restlessly, circling back to the piece of property that had changed more than just my career. The Zephyr Cove house had entered my life during a season when I was learning how far I could stretch myself without breaking. I had already restored several homes with Daniel by then, and we had grown the business enough to hire 2 additional project managers. Work was steady, sometimes chaotic, but rewarding. I could walk into a place that had been abandoned or abused and somehow see through the dust and broken boards. Maybe that was why the house felt personal before I even walked through its doors. I remembered the first time Daniel mentioned it. We were at a coffee shop in Boulder, sitting with blueprints spread over the table between us. He had that look he got whenever he found something interesting, the kind of spark that pulled you closer because you knew he had discovered an opportunity. "There is a place up in Zephyr Cove," he said. "Owner is backed into a tax issue and trying to sell before the state steps in. Big place, bigger than anything we have taken on. But the structure is sound." I had lifted my coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. "Do you want to see it?" He looked at me across the table for a long moment. "Not without you." 2 days later, we drove up through the mountains, winding along the shoreline until the trees opened up and revealed a large but weather-worn home tucked back behind a row of old cedars. The moment I stepped out of the truck and inhaled the clean lake air, something inside me stirred. The house was tired, its paint peeling and its windows clouded, but it stood with the kind of stubborn dignity I admired in old places. We walked through the entry hall, our footsteps echoing. Dust lay thick on the wooden floors, and the chandelier overhead had gone dull from years without care. But the bones of the house were beautiful. Tall beams, wide staircases, large windows looking out onto the water. I felt a quiet pull, the same one I felt every time I encountered something that deserved to be brought back to life. Daniel stepped beside me and murmured that if we got it for the right price, it could be our biggest project yet. But the way he looked at me made it clear he had already guessed what I was feeling. "This one is yours," he said. "I can see it." He was right. From the moment I walked through that space, I knew it would be different. I knew I wanted to rebuild it piece by piece until it could hold someone's life again. Maybe in some hidden way I wanted to rebuild something in myself at the same time. The purchase moved quickly. The owner was overwhelmed by debt and ready to sign with anyone who could close fast. Liam handled the paperwork and made sure my name remained confidential. He insisted on it, reminding me that success could attract attention I did not want. I appreciated his bluntness. I appreciated even more the fact that he never asked me why I needed that privacy. He simply understood. Once the house was mine, the real work began. During the first few months, the project consumed nearly all my time. I drove up every weekend and stayed in a motel nearby. I spent long days helping the crew sand floors, tear down damaged walls, replace wiring, restore windows. I wanted to know the house intimately, every flaw, every hidden path, every potential waiting to be uncovered. Some nights, I stood in the empty living room long after the crew had left. I would sit on the floorboards that had not yet been finished and listen to the house breathe. Old places have a way of speaking if you let them. They tell you what they need. They tell you what they lost. They tell you what they can become. It was during one of those quiet evenings that a thought came to me, gentle but persistent. What if the house was not meant to be sold like all the others? What if it could be something more, something that mattered beyond profit? I had been donating to a local women's housing initiative in Boulder for years, sending small checks whenever I could. I knew their mission well. They helped women who had left abusive households rebuild their lives through transitional housing. I understood the weight of leaving home, even when the circumstances were far less dangerous. I understood the fear of stepping into the unknown with nothing but a bag and hope. The idea of turning the Zephyr Cove property into a safe space for women stayed with me until it felt less like an idea and more like a direction. When I brought it up with Daniel, he paused for a long time, his face softened. "You always go bigger than anyone expects," he said. "If you want this, I will help however I can." Liam helped me draft the documents that would allow me to transfer the house to the foundation once renovations were complete. He advised me to wait until the final inspections were done, so the transfer would be clean and unchallenged. I trusted him. His caution had always protected me in ways I did not fully see until later. But somewhere along the way, a strange thought took root. I began imagining giving the house not to the foundation at first, but to Melissa. At the time, I could not understand why the thought felt so powerful. Maybe I wanted her to see me in a new way. Maybe I wanted her to feel something other than pride for herself. Maybe I wanted the house to be a bridge I could not build with words. I began preparing the envelope months before the wedding, a clean cream envelope with the official transfer document inside, and a handwritten note that simply said, "I hope this brings you the happiness it brought me to restore it." Even as I sealed it, a small part of me wondered who I was trying to comfort. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time that night. It felt heavy in a way paper should not feel. Heavy with history, with what could have been, with what I still believed might be possible. Now, sitting in my living room after everything that had happened at the resort, the memory of that moment felt distant and painfully naive. The envelope had not changed, but I had. What I once saw as an offering now seemed like a wound I had nearly reopened for myself. I stood and walked to the window. The night outside was quiet. A few lights flickered in neighboring homes. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I felt the weight of my choices pressing against me, but not in a way that asked for regret. More like a quiet acknowledgement that I had crossed a point I could not uncross. My phone buzzed on the counter. For a second, my heart lurched. But when I checked the screen, it was only a weather alert. Snow expected tomorrow in the mountains. Nothing to pull me back into the day I had just escaped. I turned off the light and made my way down the hallway toward my bedroom. The air felt cool and calm and settled. As I lay down and pulled the blanket over me, the Zephyr Cove house filled my thoughts again. Not the envelope, not the wedding, just the house itself. The way it looked when the sun hit the lake and cast reflections through the restored windows. The way it stood tall despite years of neglect. It reminded me so much of the person I had fought hard to become, and the person I was finally learning to protect. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried the quiet certainty that the next days would bring consequences I could no longer avoid. And for the first time, I did not feel the need to run from them. Snow was already drifting past my bedroom window when I woke the next morning. Thin white flakes drifting sideways in the early light, soft enough that they barely touched the ground before melting. I lay still for a few moments, letting the strange heaviness in my chest settle. It was not sadness exactly, more like the weight that follows a long overdue decision, the kind that leaves you quiet instead of shaken. I got up slowly, made coffee, and stood at the counter as the smell filled the kitchen. The mug warmed my hands, but my thoughts kept slipping back to the days leading up to the wedding, to all the small signs I had tried to ignore. Looking back now, they formed a picture so clear it felt embarrassing that I had ever squinted at it, hoping it meant something else. The first sign came weeks earlier, when a cousin called to ask if I had seen the venue photos everyone was talking about in the family group chat. I told her I had not seen them. She sounded surprised. I pretended not to notice. Later that night, I asked my mother why I was not in the chat. She said it must have been an oversight. She said it lightly, as if forgetting her second daughter was something that happened often enough to be harmless. More small signs followed. Wedding updates that reached me through someone else. Conversations that shifted when I entered the room. Moments where Melissa hinted that she was curating her wedding with care for appearances. She talked about Andrew's family and how particular they were about tradition. She said they valued stability and professionalism. The way she said it told me everything she thought I lacked. There was one afternoon about a month before the wedding that stayed with me longer than the others. Melissa had asked me to meet her for lunch in Denver. I had taken it as a good sign, as if she finally wanted me included in something. We sat across from each other at a small restaurant near her office. The waiter had barely taken our menus before she started talking. She told me she was overwhelmed with planning. She told me Andrew's parents were deeply invested in every detail. She told me the guest list needed to be carefully balanced. I remember offering to help, thinking it might bring us closer. She looked at me with that same practiced smile she used at networking events and said I should not worry myself with wedding responsibilities. "You are better at working with your hands," she said. "This is a different kind of work." Her words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried the same sting I used to feel in our childhood home. The sting of being told you did not fit the image, that you belonged in the background. I tried to shake it off, but the conversation only grew sharper. She lowered her voice and added that Andrew's mother had concerns about certain relatives attending. She avoided my eyes then, stirring her iced tea. "Some people just do not fit into formal events," she said. "It is nothing personal." I remember sitting there, staring at her, wondering if she understood what she was saying. I wondered if she knew she sounded exactly like our mother, who had once told me I should find work that did not put me in front of people. I wondered if she cared. The moment that burned the deepest came after the waiter set down our plates. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and looked at me the way someone looks at a difficult truth they finally decide to say out loud. "I just do not think you are suited for building a family. Evelyn, you have always been too unpredictable, too separate. You make people uncomfortable without meaning to." I felt my pulse in my ears, not from anger, but from the strange numbness that comes when someone confirms a fear you once carried inside yourself. A fear they helped create. She kept talking, but the rest blurred into something dull and distant. I nodded and pretended to listen, but my chest tightened with the familiar ache of being told I did not belong where she believed real family lived. When the bill came, she reached for it but paused. She said she appreciated me being understanding. She said she knew her words were hard to hear. Then she smiled as if she had given me a compliment instead of a wound. Driving home from that lunch, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself she had not meant it the way it sounded. I replayed the conversation again and again, twisting her tone in my mind to something kinder, something I could live with. But by the time I reached Boulder, I knew the truth. Melissa had only said out loud what she and my mother had always assumed. They believed I did not fit into the world they were building, not good enough, not polished enough, not family enough. Now, standing in my kitchen with the soft snow outside, I felt that ache again. But it did not consume me the way it used to. It felt like remembering a bruise instead of pressing on it. My phone vibrated on the counter, jolting me from my thoughts. It was early, barely 8. I picked it up without checking the screen, half expecting a work notification. Instead, I saw Daniel's name. I answered, and his voice came through warm and steady. "You home safe?" "Yes," I said. "Long day." He exhaled. "Sounds like it. You want to come by the shop today? You do not have to. But I think getting back into routine might help." He was right. Routine had saved me more times than I could count. "I will come in a little later," I said. "Thanks for checking." "Anytime. And Ev, whatever happened out there, do not let it rewrite the story you have already built." His words settled over me, grounding me in a way family never had. I told him I would see him soon, then hung up. I finished my coffee, showered, and got dressed. On my way out the door, I paused, remembering the cream envelope sitting in the hands of a resort employee, waiting for a wedding that would unfold without me. I wondered how long it would sit untouched before someone delivered it to Melissa. I wondered what expression would cross her face when she saw it. Shock, confusion, maybe anger, maybe guilt, though I doubted that. I stepped outside. The air was crisp and cold enough to sting, and the mountains beyond the neighborhood were softened by the falling snow. I brushed flakes from my windshield and started the car. For a moment I sat still, watching the snow gather along the edges of the street. Everything looked calm, peaceful, untouched by the words that had echoed in my head since that lunch in Denver. "You are not suited for building a family. You do not belong." Snow drifted across the glass, erasing shapes and softening outlines until the world looked nearly harmless. But words do not melt the way snow does. They stay lodged where they are planted, growing roots if you do not dig them out. I shifted the car into drive and began making my way toward the office. The town woke slowly around me. People scraped frost from their windshields. A jogger in a red jacket ran down the sidewalk with her dog. Life moved forward, indifferent to all the places inside me that still throbbed from yesterday. At a stoplight, I noticed my reflection faintly in the window, older than the girl who once sat across from Melissa at family dinners, trying to prove her worth. Stronger, too, but inside that strength was a crack that still held the shape of old expectations. The light changed. I kept driving. When I reached the office, Daniel was already there reviewing blueprints at the main table. He glanced up as I walked in, reading my face the way only someone who had known me for years could do. He did not ask questions. He just nodded and gestured toward a fresh stack of renovation plans. Work waited for us. Life waited for us. But even as I took my seat and opened the first folder, the echo of Melissa's voice lingered, mixing with the cold morning air and the soft fall of snow outside. It stayed with me as I tried to focus, whispering that some wounds never fully disappear. They only quiet down until something sharp brings them back to the surface. And I already knew something sharp was coming. I could feel the shift in the air before it reached me. The way you sense a storm coming long before you hear the first rumble. It was subtle at first, a tension I could not name, just enough to tighten the space around me as I tried to work through the plans on my desk. Outside, the snow kept falling in thin, steady sheets that softened the edges of everything. Inside, I kept waiting for the world to settle, but it felt like something had begun turning beneath the surface. I tried to focus on the restoration plans for a craftsman home in Lyons, but my mind drifted toward the highway, toward Lake Tahoe, toward the lobby where I had stood the day before. My stomach tightened as I imagined Melissa walking through her rehearsal dinner preparations, oblivious to the envelope waiting for her. A small part of me hoped she would not open it until after the weekend, if only to delay the inevitable spiral that would follow. But the truth was she would open it the moment someone placed it in her hands. Curiosity had always been her first instinct. Reflection came much later, if it came at all. By late morning, the snow had turned heavier, thick flakes drifting sideways as the wind came in colder gusts. Daniel glanced up from his end of the table and studied me in that quiet, unobtrusive way he had. He never pushed, never pried, but he could sense when my thoughts were no longer in the room. "You want a break?" he asked it gently while keeping his eyes on the blueprint in front of him. I shook my head. "No, I need to keep moving." He nodded once, then returned to his work. He trusted me enough to let me find my own footing again. That was the difference between him and the people I grew up with. He never assumed I needed to be corrected, only supported. The rest of the morning passed in slow fragments, measured only by the scratch of pencils on paper and the hum of the heater battling the cold air outside. Around noon, I stepped into the break room to heat up some soup I had brought from home. While the microwave hummed, my phone buzzed on the counter, not a call, a text. It was from my cousin Erin. She rarely messaged me unless something had happened. "Did you make it home safe?" All it said at first. Then a second message appeared before I could respond. "I think something went wrong at the resort." A cold weight slid through me. I typed asking what she meant. Her reply came quickly. "People were saying your name." Melissa looked upset before the rehearsal dinner, not sure what happened. My pulse began to throb in my throat. I stared at the phone until the microwave beeped, startling me back to the room. I let the soup sit untouched as I returned to my desk. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked. "I think the envelope might have reached her." He set his pencil down. "You ready for that?" I let out a long breath. I do not know what ready looks like for something like this. He studied me quietly. "Well, remember this. Whatever Melissa feels right now, whatever comes out of this, you made a decision for yourself. That is not something to regret." I nodded, even though certainty felt far away. The afternoon wore on until the snow finally eased into a light flurry. I tried to distract myself by reviewing material costs and scheduling inspections, but the tension stayed with me. When the clock reached 3:30, Daniel stood and stretched. "Let's call it for today," he said. "Roads will get icy soon." I gathered my things and followed him out to the lot. The cold air bit at my cheeks. Snow crunched beneath our boots. When I reached my car, I heard Daniel call my name. "Ev." He paused until I looked up. "Whatever happens next, let it happen. Do not hold the weight of other people's choices." I managed a small smile. He had a way of grounding me without making me feel fragile. I got into my car, started the engine, and let the heater run until the windows cleared. As I pulled onto the road, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. The name alone made my chest tighten. He rarely called unless prompted by my mother. I hesitated before answering. His voice came through thin and strained. "Evelyn, we need to talk." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "About what?" There was a pause. I could hear dishes clattering in the background, muffled voices, the sound of my mother saying something sharply. "Your sister is upset. Something happened at the resort." I did not respond right away. He cleared his throat. "Did you leave something there for her?" The question hit harder than I expected. I kept my voice steady. "Yes, I left a gift." He exhaled into the phone, a shaky, long breath. It sounded more troubled than angry. "She opened it," he said. I waited. He said nothing else. "Is she all right?" I finally asked. Another pause. "Hard to say. There is a situation with Andrew's family, and some confusion about the house." The house. Just hearing the word from him felt strange, like it did not belong in his mouth. My father had never once asked about my properties, my projects, or the life I built on my own. To him, I was still the girl who left home too soon, not the woman who ran a company. "Dad," I said finally, "what exactly is going on?" He hesitated again. "I do not know all the details, but things have become complicated. Your mother wants to speak with you." "No." The answer came out more quickly than I intended. I softened my tone. "Not right now." He did not argue. He only said, "She is shaken." Shaken, not sorry, not reflective. Just shaken because something in her world shifted without her anticipating it. I hung up before he could continue and pulled over into an empty lot beside a gas station. I let my forehead rest against the steering wheel, breathing slowly until the pressure in my chest eased. Cars moved past me, their headlights trailing faint reflections across the wet pavement. After a minute, I sat up and looked straight ahead. Snow gathered in small piles along the curb. A couple walked out of the convenience store laughing, their arms linked. Life kept moving in soft, ordinary ways, while my own felt like it was tilting toward something inevitable. As I merged back into traffic, my phone buzzed again. This time I did not look. I knew who it was, Melissa, or my mother, or both. The car filled with the quiet hum of the heater as the town passed by outside my windows. I drove without hurrying, letting each traffic light dictate my pace. At a red light near the edge of downtown, I finally lifted my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Melissa and 2 from my mother. One voicemail notification blinked at the top of the screen. For a second, I considered listening to it. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. If they wanted answers, they could sit with the same silence they had left me in for years. When I arrived home, the snow had stopped entirely. The air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke from a neighbor's house. I walked inside, locked the door, and stood in the hallway without turning on any lights. The quiet wrapped around me again. Something sharp was coming. I could feel it. Something already set in motion long before I ever walked into that resort lobby. And whatever it was now heading straight toward me. Something already set in motion long before I ever walked into that resort lobby was now heading straight toward me. And the strange thing was that I felt it before I heard any proof of it. It lived in the silence of my house that evening, in the way the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting. I set my keys on the table, hung my coat, and stood in the dim hallway without turning on a single light. The quiet pressed in, gentle but heavy, like the moment before a glass shatters. I walked into the living room and finally turned on the lamp. The soft yellow glow made everything look calmer than I felt. I looked at my phone lying where I had left it face down on the kitchen counter. My fingers hovered over it, not quite ready to pick it up. I had spent so many years jumping to answer my family out of hope or fear or habit. Tonight I let it ring into the empty air. It lit up again as I watched. Melissa, then my mother, then Melissa again. No messages yet. Just calls, one after another, like someone pounding on the outside of a locked door. I made myself tea, sat on the couch, and wrapped my hands around the warm mug. The phone finally vibrated with a voicemail. I let the steam rise into my face, then pressed play without putting the phone to my ear, letting the speaker fill the room. It was Melissa. Her voice came in fast, sharp at the edges, like she had been crying or yelling or both. "Evelyn, you need to call me back right now. I do not know what this is about. I do not know why you would do something like this. But everything is falling apart. Everyone saw the papers. Everyone. Andrew is furious. His family is asking questions I cannot answer. And Mom says you should have told us if you were planning something this big. You need to fix this. The voicemail cut off abruptly. Not one word of what she said caught me off guard, except maybe the last sentence. You need to fix this. I let out a slow breath and set the phone down. The tea had already cooled. A few minutes later, another voicemail appeared. This time from my mother. Her voice carried that tight, strained quality she used whenever something threatened her sense of control. Evelyn, we need to speak. I do not understand what you were thinking. Your sister is devastated. You created chaos at her wedding. This is not how families treat each other. Call me back, immediately. Families! I almost laughed. They had said it my whole life like it was a club I never quite qualified for. And now suddenly they remembered I was part of it. My phone buzzed again with a text, this time from Aaron. The rehearsal dinner is a mess. People are talking. Melissa had a meltdown after opening that envelope. Andrew's parents are furious. Someone pulled up public records and saw your name attached to the acquisition. Everyone assumed the house was meant for her. No one knows what is happening. My stomach tightened, not because of guilt, but because of how predictable it all was. Melissa had always believed she would inherit the best parts of life, without ever having to wonder where they came from. I typed a quick reply to Aaron. I'm fine. Do not get involved. Almost immediately, she wrote back, You should know Andrew got into it with his father. Something about appearances, reputations, how this looks. It is bad. I turned off the phone screen and leaned back into the couch. The lamp hummed quietly beside me. Outside, snowflakes floated down in slow spirals under the streetlight. For a long moment, I let myself feel nothing at all. Then the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the silence so suddenly that I jerked upright. It rang again, louder this time. I stood slowly, heart pounding, and moved toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw no one. Just darkness and the faint glow of the street. Then a sharp knock. I took a breath and opened the door halfway. A man stood there, bundled in a heavy coat. Andrew. His face was red from the cold, or maybe from anger. His eyes were tight, the way people look when they have been embarrassed in front of an audience and are desperate to gain back control. Evelyn, we need to talk. No greeting, no explanation, just that demand. I did not open the door further. What do you want? He looked down at the doorstep, then back up at me, struggling to maintain composure. You blindsided us. You blindsided Melissa. Why would you do something like that on her wedding weekend? I felt my jaw tighten. Did she tell you I showed up to check in and found out I was not invited? He blinked as if the thought had not even occurred to him. This is not about that. This is about the house. My parents saw the donation records. They think there is more going on, something that affects our family name. Family again? Always that word. I leaned against the doorframe, steadying myself. Andrew, the house is mine. What happens to it is my choice. Melissa had nothing to do with it. He stepped closer. You made her look like a fool. You embarrassed her in front of everyone. I felt something cool and steady settle inside me. I had not felt it often, but when I did, it kept me from shaking. I said quietly, Melissa embarrassed herself when she made it clear I was not welcome. The envelope was never meant to be opened by an audience. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. My parents are furious. They think Melissa tried to hide some kind of financial arrangement. They are using words like trustworthiness and stability. This affects my career. You cannot just do something like this and disappear. I stared at him for a long moment. He had no idea what he was asking. He wanted me to clean up a mess I did not make. He wanted me to be the quiet, compliant outsider my family had always trained me to be. I said nothing. Silence can be more powerful than any argument. Eventually, he shook his head. Melissa is falling apart. She thinks you did this to get back at her. She wants answers. Tell her, I said, my voice steady, that she should have thought about family before deciding who counted as part of hers. He stared at me, stunned, as if he had never heard me speak plainly before. Then he muttered something about expectations and reputations and turned away. His boots crunched on the snowy walkway until the sound faded into nothing. I closed the door slowly and locked it. My hands trembled in the quiet that followed, not from fear, but from the long suppressed release of finally telling the truth. I walked back into the living room and stood at the window, watching the snow drift under the street lamp. My phone buzzed again on the counter. I did not move to check it. Some storms arrive with thunder, some arrive as quiet as falling snow, but either way they leave the landscape changed. And I already knew the landscape of my family had shifted forever. I just did not yet know how far the cracks would reach. The cracks in my family had been forming for years, but that night as I watched the snow settle into quiet white layers along the street, I knew they had finally split open. The house felt still around me, almost expectant, as if waiting for the next tremor. I stood there at the window for a long time, letting the cold from the glass seep into my palms until my breath steadied again. I turned away eventually and headed down the hall. My bedroom felt warmer than the rest of the house, but my mind stayed alert and bright, refusing the rest my body needed. I lay awake for hours, listening to the heater click on and off, listening to the faint hum of wind brushing across the roof. When I did drift into sleep, it was thin and light, the kind that shatters at the slightest sound. Morning arrived before I expected it. Soft, pale light cut across the room, catching in the folds of the curtains. My phone sat on the nightstand where I had abandoned it, dark and silent now, but its weight seemed louder than any noise it could have made. I reached for it slowly. Dozens of notifications lit the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, a cluster of messages that pushed up into a long scroll. I did not open any of them, not yet. Instead, I got dressed, pulled on warm layers, and stepped into the cold hallway. The house was so quiet that even the creak of the floorboards sounded different, sharper, as if the place itself sensed a change approaching. I made coffee and took the mug into the living room, curling into the corner of the couch. Only then did I press play on the first voicemail. It was Melissa again, her voice hoarse and frantic. "Evelyn, I need you to answer. You cannot disappear right now. Everything is coming apart." Another voicemail from her followed. "You made me look like a liar. People think I was trying to claim your house. Andrew is furious. His parents are furious. I cannot breathe. Why did you do this?" I set the phone down before the next message started. A strange calm settled over me, steady and cool, not satisfaction, not revenge. Something closer to understanding. This was never about the house. It was about a lifetime of being unseen until the moment I became inconvenient. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text. From Daniel. "Come to the office when you can. We should talk." I finished my coffee, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The sky was wider today, pale blue with streaks of lingering cloud. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked to the car. The cold air cut through my thoughts, offering clarity I had not expected. The drive to the office was quiet. No music, no calls, just the road and the steady hum of the engine. When I pulled into the lot, Daniel was already outside clearing snow from the front steps. He looked up when he saw me and gave a small nod. He did not ask if I was all right. He knew me well enough to understand I did not need that question. Inside the office, the heat wrapped around us in gentle waves. He hung his coat on the rack and motioned for me to sit. Papers were spread across the table, but he pushed them aside and sat across from me. "I heard from someone this morning," he said. "Apparently things at the resort got loud." I swallowed. "Erin texted me last night. She said there was a scene." "That is putting it lightly," he replied, leaning back. The donation confirmation went public. Someone pulled up the registry on their phone. Suddenly everyone knew the house was yours and not part of Melissa's future. The words settled between us. "Does it change anything you planned?" Daniel asked. I shook my head. "No, the transfer is final." He nodded. "That is what I figured. But someone reached out this morning, Praaku. You should know about it." My stomach tightened. "Who?" He hesitated. "Andrew." I let out a tired breath. What did he want? Daniel folded his hands. "He wanted details about your finances, your company, the house." He implied that their family deserved clarification for the sake of reputation. Daniel paused. I told him to leave, firmly. A strange warmth rose in my chest. Loyalty always hit harder when you were not used to receiving it. "Thank you," I murmured. He held my gaze for a moment. "Ev, they are panicking because they built their lives on perception. You live yours on truth and work. That difference scares some people." I looked down at my hands. For so long I had carried shame that never belonged to me. Hearing him say that loosened something inside me I had not realized was still clenched tight. Before either of us could speak again, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it, but it buzzed a second time, then a third. I pulled it out. It was my mother. I let it buzz until it stopped. When it finally fell silent, A voicemail appeared. I should not listen, I whispered, half to myself. Daniel answered quietly. Then do not. But I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the small office. It was sharp, brittle, tired. Evelyn, we are at the hotel. Your sister is in the suite crying. People are talking. Andrew's parents are threatening to postpone the ceremony. They think you are trying to hurt Melissa. You need to come here. We need to show them we are a united family. A cold ache spread through my chest. There it was. Not concern, not remorse, only image. Always image. The voicemail ended. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Daniel spoke softly. That is not your burden, Ev. You do not have to put yourself back in that place for their sake. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. He was right. Every instinct told me to protect myself. Not the fragile illusion they were scrambling to restore. But even as I tried to stand on that clarity, another text appeared on my phone. It was from Aaron again. There was an argument. Andrew's father pulled him aside in front of everyone. Something about responsibility and choosing a wife who does not create scandal. People heard him. It is getting bad. My heart tightened. Not out of pity, but out of the sense that something irreversible had begun. Melissa had wanted a perfect wedding, a perfect life, a perfect narrative, and in a single moment, that carefully constructed image collapsed under its own weight. I set the phone down and rubbed my temples. I could almost hear my sister's voice echoing from years ago. You are always the problem, Evelyn. You bring complications. But she had chosen this complication by pretending I did not exist. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot, blanketed in white. After a moment, he turned back to me. What do you want to do? The question lingered in the air. No pressure, no expectation, just space. I did not answer right away. Instead, I listened to the quiet settling around us, the hum of the heater, the soft ticking of the wall clock, the sound of my own breathing finally slowing. I want to do nothing, I said finally. I want to let the consequences unfold without me stepping in to soften them. Daniel nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. Then that is what you will do. I sat back in the chair, letting his words ground me. Outside, the snow had begun falling again, gentle and steady, covering everything in sight. My phone stayed silent for a few minutes. Then it buzzed. Then again, and again. I watched the screen light up without reaching for it, because for once in my life, the silence belonged to me, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as I needed. The silence belonged to me, and holding it felt steadier than anything I had done in years. I left my phone face down on the table in Daniel's office and let the quiet settle between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Snow drifted against the window in soft white waves, and the world outside looked untouched, almost peaceful, as if none of the chaos unfolding in Lake Tahoe could reach me here. Daniel finally spoke, his voice warm and low. You know you do not owe them a response. I nodded. I think I finally understand that. We spent the next hour reviewing work schedules and planning inspections for the week, though both of us knew my mind was only halfway in the room. Still, the normalcy helped. After everything that had happened in such a short time, having something predictable to hold on to felt like the first deep breath after being underwater. When I left the office, the afternoon light had already begun to thin. I drove home slowly, watching the freshly fallen snow glow pale blue along the sidewalks. Every part of the day felt quieter than the one before, as if the world was pausing for me to catch up with myself. Once inside my house, I turned on a few lamps and warmed up leftovers for dinner. It felt strange to go about my routine while messages piled in. I could almost feel the urgency buzzing against the silence, but I let it continue unanswered. Later in the evening, I sat down in the living room, wrapped a blanket around my legs, and finally turned my phone over. There were more missed calls, more voicemails, more texts from people who had not spoken to me in months. It was only then that I played the message from my father. His voice sounded tired, much older than he had sounded the night before. Evelyn, we are trying to understand what happened. Your sister is distraught. Your mother is upset. The Harrisons are questioning whether the wedding should continue. He hesitated. I know things have not been equal between you girls, but this feels like a misunderstanding that has gone too far. Please call us back. I listened without emotion. He still could not see it. After everything, He still framed the problem as a misunderstanding, as if exclusion was something small and accidental, not a choice sharpened over years. My next voicemail was from Melissa. Her voice cracked in places. I cannot fix this. I need you to come explain. Everyone thinks I lied. They think I tried to claim your property. I need you to come here now. I need you to undo this. Undo this. Not talk, not understand, not apologize. I set the phone down again and closed my eyes, letting the warmth from the blanket soothe the ache beneath my ribs. A soft vibration buzzed against my palm. I looked at the screen. This time it was a text from the director of the foundation, Dr. Avery Jones. Just wanted to confirm receipt of the final paperwork. We appreciate your generosity. The women who will live in this home will benefit greatly. For the first time that day, my breath left me in a long, slow release. This was the reminder I needed. The house was already becoming what it was meant to be, a place of transition, a place of safety, a place of possibility. Not a bargaining chip, not a symbol of status, not a trophy. I typed a simple reply thanking her for the message, then set the phone aside. I went to bed early that night. Sleep came easier than I expected. Maybe because the exhaustion was more emotional than physical. When morning arrived, a soft pink light spilled through my curtains. I rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from my back, and made coffee before stepping outside onto the porch. The world was covered with a fresh layer of snow, smooth and bright. I took a deep breath of cold air and let my shoulders finally relax. Whatever came next, I knew I had stopped something inside myself from breaking further. It was just past 9 when my phone rang with a number I recognized only from emails. I answered, surprised. It was the foundation director. Evelyn, I wanted to update you. The press release went out this morning. Several local journalists picked it up. I froze. The press release. Of course, the foundation would announce the donation publicly. It was part of their protocol for major contributions. I had known this was coming, but I had not connected the timing to everything unfolding in Lake Tahoe. Thank you for letting me know, I said. You should also know, she continued gently, that the announcement includes your name. We credited you as the donor, as you requested in the initial paperwork. I thanked her again and hung up, letting the phone rest in my lap as the realization settled in. This news would travel fast. Faster than Melissa expected. Faster than I expected. An hour later, the first call came from Erin. It is everywhere, she whispered when I answered. Your donation. People are talking about it in the hotel lobby. Someone posted an article link in the wedding group chat by accident. It spread like wildfire. I felt a strange mixture of calm and inevitability fill me. This was the part of the story I had not fully anticipated. But it did not scare me. Ibareko. What are they saying? I asked. She took a breath. They are shocked. But not in a bad way. People are wondering why no one in the family ever mentioned you had this kind of success. Some are saying it changes how they see you entirely. I closed my eyes. Of course. People always changed their view when money entered the picture. It was never about understanding, only optics. What about Melissa? I asked. Erin hesitated. She and Andrew had a huge fight last night. His parents are worried the wedding will reflect poorly on their name. And Melissa keeps saying you blindsided her. But people are starting to ask the obvious question. Which is what? Why she left you off the guest list? A deep, quiet ache tugged at my chest. Not pain exactly, something closer to recognition. This was the moment I had always known would come eventually. I thanked Erin and ended the call. The rest of the day passed in a stillness I had not felt in years. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, watered the plants in the living room. Small tasks that helped my mind stay clear. By late afternoon, I finally listened to the last voicemail that had come in. It was from Melissa again, but her tone had changed completely. Evelyn, I did not know. I did not know what you built. I did not know about the house or your company or anything. I thought you were still barely getting by. Why did you never tell me? Why did you let me think you needed fixing? Please call me, please. Her voice broke into a soft, desperate sob. I waited for the apology that never came. She was upset about consequences, not her choices. The sun was setting when I walked out onto the back porch again. The sky glowed amber and lavender, the kind of beauty that arrives only after a storm. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, letting it fill me with something that felt like closure. Families are not always the people who raise you. Sometimes they are the people who show up when you are rebuilding your life piece by piece. People like Daniel, people like the women who would one day walk through the doors of the Zephyr Cove house and build new beginnings without apology. I looked back at my quiet home and felt something settle deep inside me. Not anger, not victory, something steadier, something earned. Sometimes the only way to protect the life you spent years shaping is to walk away from the people who never learned how to see it. And sometimes letting the truth speak for itself is more powerful than any confrontation. If you have ever had to choose peace over family, if you have ever stood your ground quietly when others expected you to break, I hope you will share your story with me. Tell me what part of this journey stayed with you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, I would be grateful to have you stay a while.